meeting. It's a week later. And when we look in the scriptures, the word work or labor is used over 400 times. One of the main books that it's used in is the book of Proverbs. And it talks about the fruits of our labor, and it talks about how we are rewarded for work. And usually when we think about work, we think about physical labor. Less and less of our work these days has to do with physical labor. So a lot of us sit in front of a computer, or we're we're doing administrative work. All of that has its value. But we've got to get some physical activity. During COVID, home gyms got very popular. I mean, there was the price of a dumbbell went from 50 cents a pound to $1.10 a pound, because there was such a rush on, because people found that need to be physically challenged. Now, if you want a key to longevity, Candy and I just watched a documentary called The Blue Zones, and over in Europe they did a study, and they found out the steeper your town is, the longer your life is. Because most all the towns over there in Greece and parts of Italy are built on hills, and not everybody's got a car there. So if you're walking up and down these hills and you're physically challenging yourself, you're more likely to live longer. Now, Boyd's a testimony that he owns a hill. And it's not just a little hill. I mean, he owns a big hill. Now, he goes up and down it now on a four-wheeler, but he's still got to hold on because there's rocks and every other kind of challenge that you got to take on. And that physical challenge that God intended for us. In the book of Genesis, that's last week's. In the book of Genesis, chapter 2, the Lord took the man to the garden of Eden, and to work and to take care of it. And the Lord commanded the man, "You're free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." The Lord said, "It is good for a man to not be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see that he would what he would name them. And whatever the man called them, each living creature, that was its name. So we see that first aspect of work, and he put him in the garden and told him to take care of it. We don't know how big the Garden of Eden was. Might have been just 100 acres, or a couple thousand acres. But he was to take care of it. And that was physical labor. He had to gather things and had to do all that. And he needed help. God provided him with the help he needed with Eve. But then he also gave him a second aspect to work, an intellectual aspect. He said, you need to name all the animals. Now, I don't know how many species of animals there were back then, but I know we're still discovering different kinds of beetles and different kinds of bugs. Now, I get a kick out of some of the names, and especially the dung beetle. As most of all know what dung is because we're familiar with the farm. But there's always that challenge for intellectual work. Reading, listening, talking. This helps us if we do it correctly, if we're willing to listen to the different sides of a argument or different sides of an issue. This is let us figure out what we think about it. We may not, we have to listen to people we don't agree with, but we don't have to agree with people we don't agree with. But we need a reason either way. And until we're ready to take on the challenge of either reading about the topic or listening to the topic and discussing the topic, how can we know what we truly think about something? And learning to think through things. There's an internet channel, and it talks about a good idea with the greatest of intentions and terrible results. So, yeah, well, if we do this, this will be the result. Yeah, but what then? What then? What then? I believe it was in late 40s, early 50s, and down in Georgia, they were having a lot of problems. I've talked about this topic before, with erosion along the roads, and especially along the expressways, where they had cut through these areas and there were steep banks, and a couple of engineers said, hey, you know, when I was in World War II in Japan, they had this weed that was called kudzu. And it would hold the soil really well and would grow quickly on these banks. I think we should import it, and they did. Has anybody been south of, well, about the Tennessee border? Kudzu is there. What?
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. You can tell right where the frost line is because it's the only thing that stops it.
Yeah.
It was a good idea. Well, there's a problem. It's a good idea. We'll fix it this way, but we didn't test it well enough. We didn't discuss it well enough. So, we have to keep all things in consideration. With our physical work, we make a place our own. 3 years ago, Candy and I moved from next door all the way over to Newcastle. When we moved here from Florida. I don't mind moving from Florida one bit. We called up a moving company. They came, packed everything up. I drove it up in a U-Haul, and then I had half the town helping me unload it. But when you're moving 12 miles down the road, it's back and forth and back and forth. It takes weeks. It takes you don't have everything packed, so you break half the stuff, and you're throwing away other stuff. So it's better to move across the country then. But when we got there, Candy gave me assignments. Paint this, fix that, do these, and we had more help than we could use sometimes. We would have so many people in the house helping us paint and fix up and do all this stuff. But with physical labor, we made it our own. Every room was painted a different bright color. Have you ever seen a room that's bright purple next to one that's bright yellow? It was just, I think whatever was on sale, and we figured out why, because the previous couple have been heavy smokers. And to get rid of the smell and get rid of everything, They had painted everything. But physical work, we made it our own. Now we have 15 Shades of Grey, which I have no reason. I have no idea why everything was gray, but anyone is that way. With our intellectual, we get to figure out who we are. We get to think about each and every topic, and we get to think it through, and we can present our ideas in a way that hopefully others will understand why we do what we do. Had a professor one time ask the entire, he had a whole auditorium full of people. He said, would you still believe, put your faith in Christ, if there was evidence that the resurrection had not happened? And almost to a person, everybody said, oh yeah. Now, and then he went in, well, if all these analytical experts showed you the evidence, the DNA evidence, and every other kind, would you still believe? And then he was also known as the most obnoxious professor on the entire campus, especially because he had intentionally kept his strong Taiwanese accent. But he said, what if I told you it had been disproven? And everyone said, oh no, we'd still believe. Why would we believe in something that wasn't true? We have to think about that. The foundation of Christianity is the resurrection. The sacrifice was made of crucifixion. A horrible death. A horrible death. But on that same day, we know there were at least two criminals that experienced the same death. And of those three, only one arose. Only one was the risen Christ. Only one totally demonstrated his divinity through the resurrection. And that's the foundation of our Christian faith. But we have to think through that. We have to look at the evidence. And then there's a third aspect to work. I want to stick on mentally for just a moment. Jesus spoke truth. He was admired as a rabbi because he didn't quote other rabbis. He just told it like it was. I was in a class recently, and the leader of the class consistently said, well, so-and-so says this, so-and-so, and it seemed as if she had no opinion of her own at all. It was all, and to her credit, she had done a huge amount of work, and she had well prepared for the class, but you wondered, had she really thought through this herself, or was she just giving the opinions that she thought we wanted to hear? Jesus was questioned by disciples. What did you mean by that? By the Jewish leaders. Who gives you the authority? By lawyers. Well, what about in this particular case? By foreigners. Well, does that apply to us? We're not Jewish. There was an intellectual battle during his time. He was questioned directly, and he never turned away from the question. Now, sometimes he'd answer a question with another question, which is kind of going back to that if we do this, this will happen. Yeah, but what about then? What happens next? So we see he was not afraid to answer the questions. He was prepared. We need to be the same way. Now, we won't be prepared for every question we get. There's been more than one time that a 7-year-old has stumped me. Candy and Trinica are back there with the young ones, and to me, that's scarier than the adults. But then there's the third aspect, the spiritual challenge. And again, reading, listening, talking. And we have to realize, what do we believe? What is it we believe? But the work is, once we've already done that on the mental side, on the academic side, what are we going to do about it? One, believe, be baptized, join a fellowship. People say join the church. But sometimes these days there are fellowships. I know LG&E, the power plant down the road, had a few guys that were starting to get together, and they were starting to on their lunch break. They met in a storeroom, and they started a Bible study. They started a discussion group. It was fine because they were, off the clock. They were doing it on their own, not really out in a big public place. But they ran into trouble. They outgrew the storeroom. They finally took over a portion of the cafeteria. They had their fellowship, and some of those guys were not a member of any church any place. Some of them wound up joining churches. But some of them, that was their fellowship. And that was where they were developing their spiritual side. Then, what do you do about it? Well, the people who started that study were doing something. But then there's the other thing. How can we serve in a way that people will ask us, why are you doing this? Why are you showing up right after a hurricane? Why are you showing up after a tornado to help clean up? I know that after Katrina, and I think everybody here is old enough to remember Katrina, they had a huge search and rescue going on. And they wound up with the Redneck Navy? The guys showing up in their bass boats who helped with the rescue. Tornadoes in this area, you'd be surprised how many private contractors show up after tornadoes with a backhoe to help clear roads, to help move the heavy debris. What are we going to do about it? That someone will ask us, why are you doing this? And we can answer, because Christ did for us. This is part of our work. For the last couple of weeks, each week I've talked about purpose. We have to have purpose in our work. Our spiritual work is the most valuable work we do. And we have to have a purpose for it. In the book, in his book, Friedrich Bonhoeffer, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about what went on in some of the concentration camps. And there were horrible things. But one of the things that he witnessed was they had a huge, right at the edge of the camp, they had this huge pile of rubble from where a building had fallen down. And they assigned the workers to move that pile of rubble to the other end of the camp. They figured, okay, no problem. Maybe they're going to build something else there, and they just need the area cleaned. And the guys, it was hard work, but they went ahead and did it. Took them a couple days. As soon as they finished, the next morning they got up dependent, wondering what their next assignment was. They said, okay, all the rubble you moved over there, move it back. They got it done. They figured, well, you know, some bureaucrat had probably just changed his mind. They got that done. So, okay, move it back again. And this went on for several weeks. And suddenly, there were a whole bunch of mental health issues. There were people who were actually rushing the fence between machine gun emplacements as a form of suicide. Because their work had no purpose. When we do physical labor, one of the great things about building something is when you're finished, you can say, I helped build that. I helped build that. I remember when, back when I was in high school, I helped install bowling alley lanes. Sometimes we're just adding a few lanes, sometimes we were starting from scratch. And every time we finished one of those projects, I'd get my buddies, put them in the car, and drive them wherever we'd done it. Sometimes it'd be 40, 50 miles, places. And say, I helped put these lanes in, let's do some bowling. Because I could show the fruit of my labor. When our kids come home from school, and they finally learn the multiplication tables. After you worked with them, and the teachers have worked with them, and finally, they know that 7 times 3 is 21. And they come home and they've got that paper, and they pass that test, and they have an intellectual victory that we need to celebrate with them. Or finally, I was mid to late 20s before I finally read all the way through the Bible. I grew up in a tradition that doesn't value the reading of the scriptures for ourselves as much as others. Then I had my time away, came back. Candy, in the 1980s, Candy gave me a Bible, and I decided to read it cover to cover. First time. To me, that was a big accomplishment. I finally knew what was in there. But it wasn't until later that I started sharing. Started sharing why I believed what I believed. Why I was committed to the work of Christ. Well, that's great for you, Pastor. That's your job. We pay you to do that. But you know, since I've been here, as I say, I worked on the river, unloading barges. I've worked at Walmart. I've worked at the gym. I had all these different jobs, and my place there, I didn't even let them know I was a pastor. I let them pay me for my work there. But I still witnessed. How do we witness in church? We witness by remembering. We remember the command Jesus Christ. On that Passover, a feast, remembering that in Egypt, God had passed over everyone who had sacrificed the lamb. And he took the bread, and he broke it. He said, "This is my body, broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me, that you might have forgiveness of your sins." He didn't say, "Well, you know, if you think about it, do it." He said, "Do it. Do it when you come again." He was foretelling the form of prophecy. He took the wine and he blessed it. Take, drink. This is my blood, shed for you, that you might have eternal life. As we share this today, you don't come at the invitation of me or of this Methodist church. You come at the encouragement and actually the command of Jesus the Christ. Ethel, will you and Katie help us out today?